Monday is back, and we are back for another day and another vlog covering the New Testament, picking up where we left off. It's 1 Corinthians 11 today. Thanks for being here. Let's kick this thing off. This is the Bible vlog. So the very first section of this chapter in 1 Corinthians sometimes causes arguments among Christians as to how it is to be applied today. Now, the topic that Paul goes over is the length of hair for people, covering your head if you're a woman, and other things that may strike us as a little bit more odd today. You know, I remember years ago at a church I attended, there was a lady who went to our church who always wore this kind of like handkerchief thing on her head. I always thought it looked a little weird as a kid, and I remember that just being curious one time, I asked her why she wore it, because it was literally every single Sunday that this thing was on her head. And the reason she told me was actually based out of this chapter that a woman's hair is her glory, and she felt she should cover her head when in church. Now, I've even had people on my own videos get mad at me for wearing a baseball cap when I do some of these vlogs. So before we go any further, let's look at some of the text here, shall we? Go to verses 3 through 5. But I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ. The head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man praying or prophesying having his head covered dishonors his head. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. Okay, now skip down and go to verses 12 through 15. For as woman came from man, even so man also comes through woman, but all things are from God. Judge among yourselves, is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory for her hair is given to her for a covering. Wow. Well, that's a lot that Paul just dished out there. So what is going on? Can guys never have long hair? Must women always cover their heads? Is this still for today? Let's break all of this down. So there is a key verse here that really puts all of this in perspective, and it's verse 3, which lays out the order of authority. The order is God the Father, God the Son, the man or husband, and the woman or wife. Now, to better understand this, the veil or covering on the head of a believing Corinthian wife showed that she was under the authority of her husband, and therefore under submission to God. Now, let me be very clear, this was a cultural thing at this time. How do I know this? Because in the Bible itself, you can look at Samson from the Old Testament. He had taken a Nazirite vow to never cut his hair for his entire life. Now, in addition to this, you have to understand the historical background that Paul was writing from. See, in Corinth, women of good reputation rarely appeared in public without some type of veil on their head. Only prostitutes went around with their heads uncovered. On the other side, men who appeared in public with long or kind of overly styled hair were considered to be homosexual or practitioners of some kind of a pagan religion. Now again, remember that this is in the context of Corinth during the time that Paul is writing to them. In today's culture, we no longer view a woman's wearing of a head covering as a sign of submission. In fact, in most societies, hats and things we wear on our heads are really more just for fashion. So a woman can certainly wear a head covering if she wants to. However, it's a personal choice and not something we should ever use to judge somebody's spirituality. Okay, skip ahead and we're going to look at one more issue that Paul addresses, and it's the taking of the Lord's Supper, or what we would often call taking communion today. Now, most of us, when we take communion, it's something we do in a church service among other believers and Christians, but at this time in Corinth, they were also observing the Lord's Supper, but it had started to get out of control. Some members of the church began to view taking communion as a way to be more spiritual, and that literally the more that they took in, the more blessings they would receive. It really became more of a selfish attitude of what they themselves could get out of it, instead of the focus being on Jesus and his sacrifice. So look at verses 27 through 30. Therefore, whoever eats this bread or drinks this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. For this reason many are weak and sick among you, and many sleep. Now notice that Paul ended by saying that many were weak, sick, and some are asleep, or in other words, people literally died. Now what is believed to have been happening in these situations was that some members of the church were literally overeating and drinking by thinking the more that they did it, the more blessed they would become. Now of course this attitude was born out of selfishness and completely missed the point of remembering Jesus' sacrifice. Thus the reason Paul has to remind them, slow down. Don't make the Lord's Supper an all-you-can-eat buffet. Now, as crazy as this may seem to us today, it's always a good reminder to keep things in perspective and to make sure our intentions are always about furthering Jesus instead of ourselves. All right, guys, another one in the books. That is number 11. The Corinthian church were pretty crazy, weren't they? All right, we'll come back tomorrow for chapter 12. It's about spiritual gifts and one you don't want to miss. All the Pentecostals are like, come on, bring it. Well, you all have a beautiful day. You know I love your faces, and I will see you tomorrow.